Okay, picture this. A Jewish community living, actually thriving, for centuries in India. And not just surviving, but welcomed, in a way that feels so different from what many other Jewish diasporas experience.
It really does. Kind of flips the script on the standard narrative of Jewish history.
Exactly. It's this amazing story of the Jewish community in Kerala, way down on India's southwestern coast. That's what we're diving into today.
And it's a fantastic story. We're drawing mainly from a study that really maps out the journey of this pretty unique community.
Right. So our mission here is to unpack, well, their incredibly long and peaceful history there, how they adapted in some really unique ways to Indian culture, and eventually what led to their decline in Kerala.
We want to give you a clear picture, sort of the key insights into how coexistence can work, what diaspora life looks like, but without getting totally bogged down in every single detail.
It'd be fascinating. And it feels relevant, too, thinking about cultural exchange and, well, how different groups can live together.
Definitely. It offers a lot to think about regarding identity, belonging, and just the possibilities of peaceful coexistence.
Okay, so setting the scene. Kerala itself was always a bit of a crossroads, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Geographically primed for trade and different cultures mixing.
Absolutely. That coastline location was key. It fostered this long history of welcoming traders, different religions. It was already a pluralistic place, you could say.
So fertile ground for a new community.
Exactly. And that existing atmosphere, plus the fact that early rulers seemed quite open to groups who could contribute economically, that certainly helped the Jewish community find a footing.
And the study really hammers home how different their experience was. Centuries of relative peace, minimal anti-Semitism, which is just not the norm elsewhere, is it?
Not at all. And it seems like a few things came together. They were important traders, clearly adding value.
Okay, economic benefit.
Makes sense.
Their numbers were relatively small, so perhaps less perceived as a threat.
But crucially, those early rulers didn't just tolerate them, they actively welcomed them, granted them land, tax breaks, even special ceremonial privileges.
Wow, that's more than just acceptance. That's encouragement.
It suggests a pretty sophisticated approach, maybe seeing the mutual benefit.
Yeah, figuring out when they first arrived. That seems a bit tricky. The study mentions a few possibilities.
Yeah, it's not crystal clear. There are theories linking back to King Solomon's, trade in sandalwood, ivory, spices.
That far back.
Potentially. Or maybe the Babylonian exile, 6th century BCE. Or after the Second Temple was destroyed in 70 CE. There's also talk of a migration in the 4th century CE.
So multiple possibilities, suggesting a long, perhaps layered history.
Exactly. What seems clearer is that Cranganore, which they called Shingli, or Muziris in ancient times, was that initial main settlement area.
Right, Cranganore. That's where they really put down roots initially.
And a huge piece of evidence for their status there comes from around 1000 CE, these copper plates.
Yes, the Yehuda Shasanam granted to Joseph Rabin. These sound important.
Incredibly important. Think of them like a royal charter. In South India at that time, getting a grant etched onto copper plates was a big deal. It signified official recognition and status.
So what did they actually grant?
Specific things, land rights, exemptions from certain taxes, the right to collect tolls, even permission to use specific ceremonial items like certain lamps, umbrellas, drums, trumpets.
So real integration into the local social structure, not just living alongside it.
Precisely. It shows a high level of acceptance and integration.
But then things changed dramatically.
Yeah.
Nature intervened, right? That huge flood in 1341.
Yes, it's fascinating how a natural disaster directly rerouted their history. The flood apparently silted up the harbor at Cranganore, making it less viable for trade.
And Cochin rose as the new port.
Exactly. So over time, the Jewish community gradually shifted south towards Cochin. By the 1700s, they were generally known as the Cochin Jews. That name reflects the move.
Okay, so established for centuries, then this shift. And then new groups of Jewish people started arriving much later, from Spain.
Yes, the Sephardi Jews, often called Paradesi, meaning foreigners, they arrived starting in the 16th century after the Alhambra decree forced them out of Spain and Portugal.
And they brought different connections?
Right. European trade links, different languages. They were a distinct group. And later still, in the late 19th century, some Baghdadi Jews arrived too, and they mostly assimilated into that Paradesi community.
So this is where that split really solidifies, between the Malabari Jews, the older community, and these newer Paradesi arrivals.
Yes, and the study points out it wasn't just a neutral distinction. There was a definite social hierarchy, a divide.
The terms use black Jews for Malabari, white Jews, for Paradisi seem to point to that, though the study clarifies it wasn't purely about skin color.
No, it was more complex, but those terms reflect a stratification. And crucially, the study emphasizes the lack of intermarriage between the two groups.
They had separate synagogues, too.
Yes. Separate synagogues, distinct social circles. The study calls it a kind of racial polarization within the community itself.
Which is really striking given how well they coexisted with their non-Jewish neighbors. And the study suggests this internal division might have, well, weakened them in the long run.
It's a really interesting point some scholars raise. Could this internal disunity, this lack of full integration within the Jewish community, have maybe undermined their overall resilience, made the later emigration easier perhaps?
Food for thought. Internal cohesion versus external peace.
The study actually has a table, Table 3, that lays out these differences really clearly. Origins, descriptors, marriage patterns, synagogue use, even where they tended to emigrate later on.
Right, it helps visualize those two distinct streams within the one community.
Definitely underscores that these weren't just surface-level differences.
Let's shift to their contributions to Kerala. They weren't just living there peacefully, they were actively involved.
Oh, very much so. Historically, big players in international trade. Later, more into petty trading, but always economically active.
And they played a role in modernizing Cochin, too, didn't they? The study mentions infrastructure.
Yes, that's quite significant. Samuel S. Coder is a key figure here. His Cochin Electric Company, importing generators, laying copper lines for electricity in the early 20th century. That's a massive contribution.
Huge impact on the city's development.
And it wasn't just electricity. He apparently introduced the concept of supermarkets, set up private ferry services.
Really? Supermarkets?
That's what the source suggests. And the Coder House, which was his residence, is now a heritage hotel, a visible legacy.
It shows how diaspora groups can really drive innovation. And their relationship with the local rulers, apart from those early copper plates, was generally good.
Largely very positive, yes. Welcoming gestures, the land grants, the privileges. There's even a story from 1550 about the king of Cochin respecting the Jewish Sabbath.
That's quite something, a Hindu king honoring the Sabbath.
Speaks volumes, doesn't it? But things weren't always smooth. Colonialism brought challenges.
Right, the Portuguese weren't so welcoming.
No, that was a difficult period. The Portuguese actually destroyed the Paradisi synagogue in 1662. But then status improved under the Dutch, who came after. The Paradisi community, especially figures like the Rahabi family, who worked with the Dutch East India Company, gained prominence then.
So, shifting fortunes depending on the ruling power.
Exactly. It shows how external politics could really impact their lives.
The study has another table, Table 4, right?
Yeah.
Listing notable figures across the centuries.
Yes, it's a great summary. From Joseph Rabban and those foundational plates, through poets and scholars, right up to leaders like Abraham Barak Salem, who was a nationalist, and Samuel Coder with the infrastructure development.
It really drives home the breadth of their involvement over such a long time.
It does. They weren't passive bystanders. They were part of Kerala's story.
Okay, let's talk culture.
Yeah.
Because living somewhere for that long, you don't just stay separate, right? There must have been blending.
Absolutely. And this is where it gets really fascinating. Take their language, Judeo-Malayalam.
Judeo-Malayalam.
Yes, a distinct dialect of Malayalam, the local language, but written sometimes in Hebrew script, incorporating Hebrew words, maybe preserving some older linguistic forms. It shows deep linguistic integration while holding on to Jewish identity.
That's incredible. And the folk songs, you mentioned those earlier.
The Jewish Malayalam folk songs, yes. Around 250 documented songs, primarily composed and sung by women.
By women. For what occasions?
Life cycle events, mainly weddings, holidays, births. They blended Jewish themes and stories with local Keralan musical styles and structures.
Wow, that's a really rich, unique tradition. And there are efforts to revive them now.
Yes, particularly among the Cochin Jewish community in Israel. It speaks to how precious that cultural heritage is.
What about religious practices? Did they adapt those too?
They certainly did, while sticking to core Jewish law, of course. For instance, due to a lack of formally ordained rabbis at times, elder males often took on spiritual leadership roles. And that prominence of women in the musical tradition, composing and singing devotional songs, that's somewhat unusual in more orthodox streams of Judaism.
Interesting.
They also educated women in Hebrew. Women participated in reading prayers, even reading from the Torah sometimes, plus adopting local customs like taking off shoes before entering the synagogue.
Ah, like in temples and mosques in India.
Exactly. Or wearing bright, colorful clothes for festivals, which might contrast with traditions elsewhere.
And even festivals got a local twist.
Yes, like Hanukkah celebrations apparently took on some resemblance to the local festival of Diwali, the Festival of Lights.
Makes sense, adapting to the visual culture around them.
And they had a unique Purim tradition, apparently involving destroying effigies, which some interpret as a symbolic way to challenge social hierarchies, though that seems to have faded among the community in Israel.
It really paints a picture of cultural hybridity, doesn't it? Deep integration, adaptation, resilience.
Definitely. They created something truly unique in Kerala.
And the physical reminder, the synagogues, they must be incredible buildings.
They really are powerful symbols of their long history. The most famous is the Paradisi Synagogue in Mattancherry in Jewtown.
That's the one from 1568, the oldest active one in India and the Commonwealth.
That's the one. Though it was destroyed by the Portuguese, remember?
Ah, right.
And rebuilt in 1664. It's stunning. It has this 45-foot clock tower added later.
With Hebrew, Latin, and Malayalam numerals, I read somewhere.
That's right. And inside, Belgian chandeliers, these beautiful hand-painted blue Chinese floor tiles from the 18th century. Apparently, each one is unique.
Wow.
Central pulpit, a women's gallery upstairs, a beautifully carved ark holding Torah scrolls with gold crowns gifted by local kings, and it houses those original copper plates we talked about.
Incredible. And it's still used.
Yes, it's the only one with a regular, albeit tiny, congregation today. It's also a major tourist site. You have to go barefoot, follow a dress code. A living museum, almost.
But there were others. The study mentioned 8 synagogues by the 18th century.
Yes, 7 Malabari ones, and the one Paradisi Synagogue.
But most are gone now, or inactive.
Sadly, yes. With the community shrinking so dramatically, most fell into disuse. Some are in ruins, some were demolished.
But there are efforts to save some.
Thankfully, yes. The Kerala government's Maziris Heritage Project has done great work. And private efforts, too.
Like which ones?
Well, the Perur Synagogue has been restored and is now the Kerala Jews History Museum.
Okay.
The Chendamangalam Synagogue is also restored, focusing more on lifestyle, the Kerala Jews Lifestyle Museum.
So being repurposed to tell the story.
Exactly. The Kadavampagam Synagogue in Ernakulam, which might be one of the oldest, dating back perhaps to 1200 CE, is privately owned but renovated and open to visitors. It even has a Holocaust memorial exhibit.
That's quite a juxtaposition.
It is. Others, like the Mala Synagogue, are non-operational, but you can visit. The oldest recorded one, Kuchangadi from 1344, is gone, but its foundation stone is apparently preserved in the Paradisi Synagogue.
And the study includes a table, Table 2, summarizing these.
Yes. Table 2 gives a good overview of the major synagogues, their status, their significance. It charts that transition from active worship spaces to sites of preserved heritage.
And it's interesting that it's often the wider Keralite society, the government, that's now maintaining this heritage.
It really is. It shows a sense of shared history, a recognition of the Jewish community's contribution to Kerala's past, even as the community itself has dwindled, its cultural memory in action.
Which brings us inevitably to that dwindling. The Great Exodus.
Yes, the demographic shift after 1948 with the establishment of the State of Israel was dramatic.
Aliyah, the pull of the homeland.
For many, yes. There was this powerful idea, reinforced by Zionist movements, that India or Kerala, however welcoming, was ultimately a temporary refuge, and Israel was the true promised land.
So even centuries of peace couldn't override that pull.
For the majority, it seems not. Those who stayed were often elderly or had exceptionally deep personal or business ties to Kerala that they couldn't easily leave.
And going back to that internal division, the study suggests that might have factored into the immigration patterns.
It's suggested as a possible contributing factor, yes. Perhaps a less unified community found it easier to make the break. And the destinations reflected those old divides, too.
How so?
Most Malabar Jews emigrated to Israel, settling in agricultural communities called moshavim, or in cities, whereas many Paradisi Jews tended to prefer other destinations like Australia or Commonwealth countries.
Interesting. Different choices even in departure.
And the numbers are just stark.
Yeah.
From maybe 20,000 to 50,000 Jews in all of India in the 1940s, the Bene Israel community near Mumbai being the largest group, down to maybe 4,000 or 5,000 today.
And in Kerala specifically.
Just a handful left. The study mentions maybe 14 Malabar Jews and just one Paradisi Jew remaining in Kerala itself. compared to over 4,000 people of Cochin Jewish descent now living in Israel.
Wow, a near total departure.
It really underscores that powerful, complex dynamic between diaspora life and the call of a perceived homeland.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, we've traced this incredible arc, centuries of, well, largely peaceful life in Kerala.
Unique cultural blending, that Judeo-Malayalam language, the women's folk songs.
Significant contributions to the economy, infrastructure.
The beautiful synagogue architecture, a lasting legacy.
The internal complexities, those divisions within the community.
And then the mass immigration driven by the founding of Israel.
It really stands out as a unique story of religious tolerance, of pluralism, doesn't it?
Absolutely, a remarkable chapter, even with the community's physical presence now being so small.
And those preserved synagogues, the museums, the memories held by Keralites themselves, they act as a testament to that harmony, even now.
It does, which leaves us and you with something to ponder, I think.
Right. Considering this really unique history, deep integration, prolonged peace, prosperity even followed by almost complete emigration, what does that tell us?
What does it reveal about that complex dance between identity, belonging, feeling at home, versus the enduring pull of an ancestral homeland, even after generations away?
Especially for a community that had found such a peaceful existence elsewhere.
What lessons can we draw from the Kerala Jewish experience when thinking about migration today, about integration, about preserving cultural heritage when communities move and change? Something to definitely think about.